We continue our offseason look at the LA Kings by focusing on the biggest surprise from this past season, goalie Pheonix Copley. Will he be the number one goalie for the Kings again this season? That's next in this episode of Locked on LA Kings.
You are Locked on Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Every day. Thanks for making Locked on LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying this content. My name is Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked on LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years and a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. Coming up on today's show, we're going to continue our countdown to the 2023 NHL Draft by looking at recent LA Kings draft pick forward Jack Hughes. We've got some heartwarming news from an ugly incident at a Kings playoff game this past season and more. But we begin with maybe the most unlikely story in the NHL this season, at least from an individual perspective, and that was the rise of Pheonix Copley to become the LA Kings number one goalie. After Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson were mostly ineffective this past season, and with the Kings needing some stability in net, the Kings made the unlikely decision to turn to goaltender Pheonix Copley. Remember, they placed Cal Peterson on waivers, sent him to the AHL, and Pheonix Copley came up to join the Kings, a career minor leaguer with limited NHL experience. Now, at the time, the Kings were 13-10-4. Before turning to Pheonix Copley, made his first start for LA on December 6th against Ottawa, with the Kings posting a 5-2 victory. He went on to start 37 of the next 52 games for the Kings, posting an outstanding 24-6-3 record for the third best winning percentage in the NHL at .649, saving the Kings season and helping them to finish third in the Pacific Division and make the playoffs. His goals against average was good, 2.64, ranked 13th in the NHL. His save percentage was good enough at .903, ranked 25th in the NHL. But there was no question, despite the numbers, that Pheonix Copley improved the Kings with the stability in net that they desperately needed. But no question, it was still very unexpected. The 31-year-old came into the season with a total of 31 career NHL games, spanned over parts of 4 seasons with the Blues and Capitals. After going undrafted out of Michigan Tech, this season with the Kings, he set career highs in games played with 37, wins with 24, and with a save percentage of .903. While his NHL experience before the season was limited, he had a lot of professional experience at the AHL level. In parts of 9 seasons in the American Hockey League, Pheonix Copley amassed 233 games started and 124 wins. Now, usually at this point of the show, when we've done some of these player evaluations, we would hear from the player themselves, me telling you what they had to say in their exit interview. But Pheonix Copley was not a part of the Kings' exit interviews this year. Apparently, Jonas Korpisalo was, so I'm not sure why Pheonix Copley wasn't included. I know that it was the day after the season had ended in Game 6 in the playoff loss to the Oilers, and some of the questions obviously did focus on the playoffs, so maybe that was why Jonas Korpisalo was included and Pheonix Copley wasn't. But it was disappointing to not hear from a key member of the LA Kings who was an integral part of the season that they had. So, I'm not sure how they decide on that. But again, it was disappointing. I would have loved to have heard some questions from Pheonix Copley, some answers from Pheonix Copley about the season that he had. Because, again, it was so unexpected. It was such a great story. And plus, we don't really hear from Pheonix Copley very often. He's not a guy who does a ton of interviews. Now, I did find a rare Copley interview on the internet. This is from back in February. He was on the Athletic Hockey Show. You can find it on YouTube. And he was pretty much what you would expect. Pretty quiet, very reserved, which I think probably suits a goaltender very well. Can't get too high, can't get too low. You don't want to be emotional playing that position for the most part. Yet clearly, Pheonix Copley does have a bit of a fire that burns under the surface. We do remember the incident in Anaheim this past season where he was clearly more than willing to get into a fight with Ducks goaltender John Gibson before the referees put the kibosh on that. He also famously got into a fight with Blues goalie Jordan Binnington in their minor league days. But for the most part, Pheonix Copley usually very calm in net, not a lot of movement, very fundamentally sound. And I think that teammates can feed off of that calmness. Now, he did talk in the interview about how he was just hoping to get a chance to earn an NHL contract and how it wasn't really happening in the Capitals organization where he was. So he was looking for a new place, a new opportunity, and ended up signing with the LA Kings in the offseason. And I clearly remember when it was announced that Pheonix Copley was signed by the LA Kings. I think it was 1 year, like $800,000. It was about 4 sentences in a press release. And I don't even think he was the number one item in the press release. I think it was like number 2 or number 3. There was some other news of the day that the Kings were announcing as well. And I remember talking about this on this show briefly and commenting how Pheonix Copley was, going to be a veteran backup in Ontario. In case of emergency, he would be used at the NHL level if there was an illness or a minor injury to either Jonathan Quick or Cal Peterson. Obviously, I couldn't have dreamt what was to come for Pheonix Copley, and I'm sure he probably couldn't either. Maybe in his dreams, he had hoped an opportunity like this would happen, and clearly you could tell from that brief interview that he was a guy that if he was ever going to get his opportunity, he was going to be ready for it. And clearly he was with the LA Kings. Now, Pheonix Copley's story, I mentioned, is one of the best in the NHL this season. Again, I had mentioned this before. I really thought he should have been a finalist for the Masterton Trophy, which goes to the player in the NHL who shows dedication and perseverance to hockey, as well as, oh, by the way, the huge impact Pheonix Copley had on a team that made the playoffs. I know I voted for Pheonix Copley for Kings MVP this season in the media voting. So clearly, I thought he had a big impact on the Kings. I don't think there's any question that he was one of the most important pieces for the LA Kings this past season. Looking forward, can Copley duplicate last season for this coming season if he is called upon to be the Kings' number 1 goalie again? And I don't see why not. We've talked about this before, but he did not put up out of this world numbers as far as his save percentage or his goals against average. I would be skeptical if he had put up these amazing numbers that were just not the norm, but that wasn't the case. He was never amazing for the Kings, I don't think, but he was always solid. He gave the Kings a chance to win every game, but he never won a game by himself. He had 1 shutout this past season. And I honestly can't recall a game where I said afterwards, Pheonix Copley won that game. Yes, he was a part of many Kings wins, but like I said, I don't think he was ever the main reason why the Kings won. I do think he can play that type of role again this coming season if he is called upon. But I also think with his experience and his long road to this point, that he will be a professional regardless of whatever the role is that the Kings ask him to play, whether it's being the backup or being the number 1 goaltender, because that's been his MO so far in his career. I think the only regret, if you want to call it that, when it comes to Pheonix Copley, was that he was not able to get into a playoff game this postseason. In hindsight, maybe it would have been the better move to see him start in Game 6 against the Oilers to give Edmonton another look, maybe to draw some inspiration. As we mentioned at the time, the guy that saved the season, maybe he can save the postseason as well. Of course, if Korpisalo wins Game 6 and they force a Game 7, this wouldn't even be a debate. But for all that Copley did for the Kings this season, it would have been great to see him get rewarded with a playoff start. Will that be a sore spot for him? Will that somehow be motivation for him going into this season? My guess is no. And I'm not saying that he's happy about the way it ended for him. I'm not saying he's okay with not playing in a playoff game. I just, again, from the outside looking in at his demeanor and that the things that he says, he seems like a very calm guy who doesn't get caught up or frustrated in things that he can't control. if he's called on to play, he's going to play. If he isn't, then he's going to support his teammates and do whatever he can to help the team. He's that kind of a guy. Now, I think he will come into this season with the same mindset and philosophy that he did this past year. He's on a 1-year contract, $1.5 million. So clearly he wants to earn another contract as well. And looking at the way his career has gone, I'm expecting for him to be, again, just the pro that he has been throughout his career. He's a very easy guy to root for, an underdog type of a guy who's finally getting an opportunity. I'm glad he's back with the Kings this coming season. I think that he can be an asset for the Kings in whatever role he's called upon to play, because like I said, he's just kind of a pro's pro, whatever the case may be. He's willing to do it, a team guy. And by all accounts, a guy that really is liked by his teammates and did a great job for the LA Kings this past season. We are going to take a look at a recent LA Kings draft pick, tell you what's going on with Jack Hughes, the second round pick in the 2022 NHL draft by the LA Kings. But first, I need to let you know that you may not be aware of it, but the NBA Finals are now set. It's the Denver Nuggets against the Miami Heat. It starts on Thursday, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. It's a bonus bet back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored to three-pointers made. Plus, FanDuel even lets you get a chance on your no-sweat first bet and also get a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So again, don't miss on your chance to get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in a bonus bet when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, the NHL Draft is now 28 days away, exactly 4 weeks from today. And we're going to have a lot more NHL Draft talk between now and then. As we get closer to this year's draft, we'll focus more on what the Kings might be looking for specifically in this year's draft. As I mentioned on Tuesday's show, and for your everydayers, you already know this, but if you missed it, go back and check it out. I think you really have to wait about 5 years to evaluate a player fairly and judge whether he's going to be an NHL player or not, whether he's going to be a hit or a miss. Now, that's a general rule. There are exceptions. Brant Clark would be an exception to that, a guy who was going to be at the NHL and contributing in a shorter window than 5 years, obviously. But I think that's a good general rule. But we also, we're going to look at some of the past drafts for the LA Kings, both just kind of in a historical context and for players that have hit and missed with the Kings over the past 10 years or so. But the players who have been drafted in the last 4, 3, 2, 1 year, we don't want to ignore those players. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be doing some updates on how those players have been performing on their road to hopefully becoming LA Kings. So let's start with forward Jack Hughes, the second round pick, 51st selection overall in 2022, coming out of Northeastern University in Boston. Jack was one of 7 players selected by the Kings in 2022. 6 of them were in the 4th round or later. We actually talked about this draft in an episode way back when I first took over the show, because the Kings only had 1 pick in the first 3 rounds, and it affected their philosophy as far as, maybe how they've conducted themselves in other drafts, because they didn't have a lot of picks in the front of the draft. They had, back end picks. They kind of took more high risk, high reward types of players that were probably going to take a little bit longer to develop, players that maybe showed great skill, but they were coming off an injury, so that caused them to fall, or maybe players that were high on potential because of their size, but they needed to grow into being solid NHL prospects. However, that was not the case with Jack Hughes, the first pick of the Kings in round number 2. And if you follow the NHL, no, he is not related to the Hughes brothers, Quinn Hughes of the Canucks, or Jack and Luke Hughes, both of the Devils. The LA Kings, Jack Hughes, just is the son of a former NHL agent and now the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens. That would be Kent Hughes. Jack just finished up his sophomore season at Northwestern, and it looks like his last season with the Huskies. After making the All-East rookie team his freshman year, the 6', 165-pound sophomore scored 5 goals with 11 assists in 32 games this season. That's the same number of points he had his freshman year, but in 7 fewer games played. Now, he was a minus 14 on the season, which was by far the worst plus minus on the team. And apparently, Jack Hughes maybe didn't enjoy all of his time at Northeastern, as the 19-year-old has entered the transfer portal after this past season for the Huskies. If you're unfamiliar with college athletics, players can put themselves in the transfer portal and leave to another school without any penalty. Now, that's not always been the case in college sports, regardless of the sport. It wasn't that long ago that if you decided you wanted to transfer to another school, you had to sit out an entire season before you could then play for that school. That's not the case anymore. They've changed the rule recently. We're seeing tons of athletes in all different sports going into the transfer portal if things aren't working out where they're with their school, and going to another school and immediately playing. And that will be the case for Jack Hughes if he in fact does follow through entering the transfer portal and deciding on another team. The next time we're likely going to hear from Jack Hughes, other than maybe when we find out what school he's going to eventually go to, would be him showing up at the Kings development camp coming up in July. So I would say some uncertainty right now surrounding Jack Hughes at this point. Had that solid freshman year in college, didn't really improve numbers-wise for whatever reason. Clearly, because he's transferring, wasn't totally happy with something going on with himself or with the team, or likely with the coaching staff. Could have been he wasn't happy with the way he was being used. Could be he wasn't happy with the amount of ice time he was getting. We did mention he played 7 fewer games than the previous year. I don't know if that was due to an injury or if that was due to a coach's decision for him maybe being benched for some games. But either way, wasn't happy with what was going on. So Jack Hughes entering the transfer portal and will play for a different school next season. But again, be interesting to see where he goes and how that will affect his numbers for the upcoming season. But again, Jack Hughes, the Kings' second-round pick, first player selected in the 2022 draft by the Kings. We'll be keeping an eye on seeing how his career develops over the next year or so. We have some heartwarming news that stems from an ugly incident involving the Kings from this past postseason. But before we get into that, I want to invite you to check out Locked On NHL. Stanley Cup Finals are set, and it'll be the Florida Panthers against the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm actually excited about this non-traditional matchup. Good to see some new blood get in there. We're going to have a first-time Stanley Cup winner this season. To keep up to date with all the Stanley Cup playoff action, check out Locked On NHL, your daily show on all things going on in the NHL. That's Locked On NHL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Remember that ugly incident we had back in the playoffs? There was a young girl, an Oilers fan, who came to Los Angeles for a playoff game, and apparently she unfortunately ended up getting harassed. There was an allegation that someone spit on her. It turned out to be kind of an ugly incident, but if you also recall, the Kings fans helped to kind of turn it into a more positive story. It turns out that she is a cancer survivor and has been trying to raise money as part of the Ben Stelter Fund. If you don't remember him, he was a young Oilers fan who became friends with many of the Oilers players and unfortunately passed away due to cancer. Well, this girl's family tweeted out earlier today. Her Twitter account is at simply_Cecily. And they tweeted out a screenshot of a donation to their charity for cancer funds. And it came from the Kings Care Foundation. And it was for over $9,000. That's almost double the largest donation that she had received. And it was a tweet, obviously, thanking the LA Kings and the Kings Care Foundation for what they had done. I know that sometimes when things like this happen, there's an incident that gets headlines and it's in the news and it becomes a thing for a week or so, and then it kind of fades away and people kind of forget about it. So I thought it was very, very cool, a cool move by the Kings that these weeks later that they haven't forgotten about this young girl. And I'm assuming they were, using that time to raise funds and making that big donation to her charity and her efforts to raise funds for cancer research, cancer awareness, those types of things. So well done by the Kings Care Foundation. That was awesome. And again, that was an awful incident, but it's good to see that the actions of one or two individuals, it doesn't reflect on all of us as Kings fans, on the Kings organization. And we've tried our best to turn this into a positive. So that's really all you can do when it's all said and done. Speaking of the Kings Care Foundation, I did see that Kings defenseman Mikey Anderson tweeted out something that he's part of a new fundraiser for the Kings Care Foundation, posted a video and said that it was in celebration of his nomination for the King Clancy Award, which is an award that recognizes NHL players' contributions to their communities. And Mikey said that he was giving out an awesome fan experience for next season. If you're interested in being a part of that fan experience, which it includes meeting Mikey Anderson, you can go to alltrue.com/Anderson. And let me spell it for you because it is not how it might sound. It's alltrue, alltroo.com/Anderson, ANDERSON. And you can sign up for that fan experience with Mikey Anderson, and all of the contributions will go to the Kings Care Foundation. As always, we try and keep track about what's going on around the Pacific Division with the teams that the LA Kings are directly in competition with for playoff spots. I did see some news today involving the Seattle Kraken as they signed their general manager, Ron Francis, to a contract extension to remain under contract through the 2026-27 season. The only GM the team has ever had in their brief history helped to put together a team that was one of the biggest surprises in the NHL, making the playoffs as a wild card and then eliminating the defending Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche in the first round before losing to the Dallas Stars in round number 2. Now, you would expect, based on this season, that the Kraken could be in competition for the Kings for a playoff spot again next season, but it will be interesting to see if the Kraken were a one-year wonder or not. If their first season, or I should say in their first season, obviously they didn't do that well, so this kind of came out of nowhere. We'll see next year if this past year was a fluke or not, or if the Seattle Kraken will be another team that the Kings will have to contend with for a playoff spot next season. So for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, we are scheduled to be joined by someone representing the Royal Army. It is the official supporters group of the Los Angeles Kings, according to their Twitter bio, at LA Royal Army. So we'll see about that. Hopefully that'll come through. We've been playing kind of Twitter tag, if you will, in the messages about having somebody to come on for tomorrow's show. So hopefully that'll happen. And of course, on Friday, as always, it's our Kings Fan Feedback Friday show. If you want to send an email on that, the email address, as always, is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Again, get those emails in as soon as possible. And you can always leave a comment on the YouTube episodes in the comment sections below as well. Love to get your feedback on anything we've talked about on today's show. Pheonix Copley being the number one goalie. How would you feel if the Kings did go into the season with Pheonix as the number one goalie? On Tuesday's show, we talked about the Kings 2018 draft. If you want to reflect on that, we talked about are you rooting for the former Kings players that are in the Stanley Cup final playing for the Vegas Golden Knights? If you want to feedback on any of those things, again, it's lockedoneddie@gmail.com, or leave your comments on the YouTube episodes. We'd also love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked on LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked on LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings go.